morning, everybody. I think we'll make a start because it's 10:05. So a very warm welcome to the North East Offending Personality Disorder Pathway event. Thanks for joining us today to learn more about the biopsychosocial model, which underpins how we engage people on probation who screen into our pathway. So as a background, our pathway is jointly commissioned by Health and Criminal Justice. We work with people with personality difficulties. For most cases, a full personality disorder diagnosis is not needed, as we are not a diagnostic service. We are a multidisciplinary health and probation team, and we draw on all of our skills to support the risk management of high and very high risk people on probation who meet the criteria for our pathway. As we go through the Teams presentation today, please use the chat function in Teams if you wish, and we will aim to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. There will also be Slido exercises, so please engage with these where you can. My colleague will provide a code for you to access the Slido function in due course. And the presentation is also recorded as well. So without further ado, we will do a round of introductions from myself and fellow presenters. So I'm Elaine Gartland. I'm a Senior Probation Officer and I'm the Operational Manager for Northumbria Psychologically Informed Consultation Service, also known as PICS. And I also link into the North East Medium Secure Unit, which is the Oswin unit. And I also link into the Psychologically Informed Planned Environment Approved Premises, which is Osnam House in Newcastle upon Tyne.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Catherine Harrington. I'm also a Senior Probation Officer and I'm the Operational Manager for the Intensive Intervention and Risk Management Service in the North East, and I'll be telling you a bit more about that later.
Hi, my name's Louise Newton. I'm a Probation Officer and Regime Lead at Osnam House Approved Premises, which is a psychologically informed planned environment.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sandra Homke. I'm the Probation Officer attached to the PICS team, and I work alongside the consultants in giving formulations and low-level advice.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Anderson. I'm an occupational therapist and I work as part of Rebuilding Lives, which is an intensive intervention risk management service, or IRMS, and I work in the North East.
Hi, my name is Ellie. I'm a senior occupational therapist. I work alongside with Becky. The only difference I cover Cumbria, which is north of England.
Hello, I'm Kate Gibson. I'm a specialist occupational therapist with the IRMS team, the same as my colleagues Ellie and Becky, and I cover the Cleveland and Durham area.
Thank you. So, what is the biopsychosocial model? So you will hopefully be able to see a circular diagram on the screen, and this outlines what the biopsychosocial model is. And it considers the complex interactions between a person's biological and psychological makeup, as well as social factors which might shape the lives of the people we work with, and that might influence their perception of the world. So the model enables us to better understand a person on probation's health, the nature and type of their offending, the level of risk, and also helps us to identify any protective factors that are present in their lives. So one of the reasons that this model is so important to the way that we work with people on our pathway is because it emphasises the interactions between the three areas and supports us to have a multidisciplinary understanding of why a person is presenting with personality difficulties.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm now going to read a poem which is prepared by someone that we've recently supervised in our pathway. We would like you to listen and hold the poem in mind as we walk you through the pathway. Immediately after the poem, we would like you to take a minute and share your thoughts and feelings about the poem in a Slido exercise. Struggles by Lee at Osnam House approved premises. Going for a walk at night with sky so bright, stars so clear, I find peace at night. Every day is a struggle, but at night, looking up to the sky and stars, I find it easier to make sense, and it's not such a fight. I feel strength from the calm, clear air at night, hoping for a nice night. My head is so dark, but at night, it's so bright. With hope and light, my journey is so tight. So at night, it's so right. Knowing they had a plan for me is all I need to fight another day. I'm just going to share the Slido and ask if you can just pop your comments in there. Just wait for some things to come through. Thank you. I can see everybody's starting to share some thoughts. And I think hopeful is quite interesting because we all had different views on how Lee's words felt. So it's quite nice to see that people can see the positive, but also the sad side of things as well. Okay, so I think we've got a few. We can possibly come back to that at the end, but I'm now going to pass you on to one of my colleagues to look at the roadmap through the pathway.
Hello, everyone. We decided to illustrate a typical journey of one of our service users by providing a roadmap. So I'm going to take you from when we received the case within our service to when the person on probation is discharged from us. The process tends to start after the probation practitioner complete their OASIS risk assessment. The OASIS tends to highlight which people on probation meet the criteria for the pathway. However, here I just want to add a comment. Sometimes we are able to work with people on probation without they meeting the criteria. In that case, we use the clinical override. The rationale behind that is just sometimes ERMs can provide a short, intensive intervention to prevent further risk to escalate in relation to offending behavior. So when the case is highlighted within the OASIS, the probation practitioner have the options to bring the case to ERMS. And the first part of ERMS is our PICS consultation, which is psychologically informed consultation service. Here as well, it is important to understand that not every probation officer choose to bring the case within the PICS consultation. So there is a different of options they can take here. When the case is screened in the pathway and is brought to the case consultation service, we have the initial screening within the pathway. The probation practitioner is then invited to attend a meeting with some of my colleagues. We tend to have representative from both areas from NHS and from probation. In our PICS consultation, it sits with a probation officer, and part of the NHS is a psychologist. So during this process, we start to building the formulation, and here we tend to use a different approaches to support our formulation, and one of them in it's biopsychosocial approach. As Elaine provided a description what each domain of the biopsychosocial model is, we tend to start to think about what has affected the person, what's their experience, what actually they make the experience for them, and how we can support it on that. For example, during the formulation, we consider the biological. We think about if there is any genetic vulnerability, neuroscience, chemistry. We consider physical how. In the psychological part of the biopsychosocial model, we think about personality, person on probation perception, coping skills, attitudes and beliefs, behavior, social skills, and trauma if they have experienced any or childhood adverse events. In the social domain of the biopsychosocial model, we consider interpersonal relationship, lifestyle, peer groups, culture, social roles, and family dynamic. Understanding more how the three domains combine together during our formulation, it's helped us to think about what was happening in that person's life, how that affected them, what sense did they actually make of it, and what did we need to do to support them to prevent further reoffending and to think about the risk. So after we have completed the thorough formulation, then from information provided to us and with conjunction the probation officer, we consider what is going to be the next step. Usually the recommendation is to be referred to our intervention service, which is part of ERMS, called Rebuilding Life. In some situations, we might think that the person might not be ready for our service, or there need to be some additional work actually completed within the prison settings. We might refer to PIPE in custody, for example, home house or the beacon unit. We might think about that they need a period of assessment in Oswin ward, or we think about on release, it might be beneficial to attend a PIPE approved premises. So that's making them decision. It's not solely to the probation practitioner and the ERM staff, but we try as much as possible to involve the person on probation, considering at that stage, most of the time they will be still in custody. When ERMS is recommended, the referral is submitted to our Rebuilding Life service. As I mentioned before, it's our intervention service. Our intervention service tend to consist of myself, occupational therapists. We have psychologists, clinical support staff, PSOs, as well probation officer. So from here you can always see a clinician with different experience trying to think about what is going to be the best and how we can address the particular person referred to ERM's current difficulties. After the initial screening, we try to think about which kind of the biopsychosocial model present the current difficulties and increase the risk when that person is released to custody. So from here we can decide, is it more appropriate the intervention to be delivered by the occupational therapist, or do we need to think about more psychologically informed intervention? And again, all the decisions are taken with in mind the person on probation and how we could work with them to facilitate change and looking on the reducing the risk. As I mentioned before, majority of our cases are referred while they're still in custody. That provide us time to build that relationship and actually liaise with the person on probation while they're in custody and actually understand from them what's their current difficulties and how that and certain behaviors or attitude informing risk when released from custody. On release, we tend to offer regular face-to-face appointments that can be facilitated either in a probation office, a private premises. If the person is released to their own accommodation, that can be done that as well. On release, we start the assessment process. We use different assessment tools to actually identify the current needs and what might be helpful for the person on probation, and always in consideration with their mind. In our service, the person on probation actively participate in their intervention and treatment plans. As we know, coming from custody, especially people on IPP sentence or lifers, can be very challenging time, very turbulent. They can be facing different difficulties. Again, here we consider the biopsychosocial model in relation the family dynamic, interpersonal skills that how inform their skills. From the roadmap, we have highlighted a lot of roundabouts, a lot of junctions, a lot of things with we recognize that might not go as planned, or they might the person on probation can experience some turbulence through all entire period from release to providing that support settling in the community. We constantly formulate and we constantly use the biopsychosocial model alongside the person on probation to identify challenges, to think about what support they need in a specific area. Is it the bio, is it the psychological, or it's more the social environment? So the resources are dished out appropriately and they target the need which inform for the risk for reoffending. In some situation, unfortunately, the person might be recalled back to custody. So we tend to meet with them in custody, and after that try to understand what was going on for them in that particular situation and what sense they was making of it, and what actually led to the recall. We tend to continue providing support in custody, considering our service doesn't provide intervention. Our support is more kind of building that kind of narrative, understanding them social their personal story, to understand how further release from custody can after that mitigate further recalls and they can receive the adequate support. During the journey, we can see a lot of ups and downs, people feeling stuck of situation because certain needs are not met. For example, housing, which is part of their social domain, that in some cases can exacerbate risk or inform risk. People kind of feeling hopeless, demotivated if they're having particular struggles. We also tend to kind of think about how the biopsychosocial model can be used in that situation. So we kind of support the service to move on through the pathway. As I mentioned before, the formulation, reflection alongside with the service users, it's used all the way through the pathway and all the time with them in mind. In a lot of our appointments, we share the formulation and invite they to actually provide additional formulation, so our formulation is extended and cover each aspect of their life. After period of stability, depends on the goals we was working with them and evidence that they're making significant progress, we might reduce the contacts to maybe fortnightly or once a month. Then we can start planning for a discharge, because at the stage when they're more vulnerable and struggling, we are there to provide that support, to inform, to provide the support not for them, but also to the offender manager in relation to inform the risk. But also we want to enable them to be able to apply them resources independently at some point. So after everything is completed, all the intervention, the goals are met, and the person feel stable in a sense of all the biopsychosocial needs are met, then we tend to discharge them. In relation to people who are on an IPP sentence or lifers, they can be referred back to the team if there is a further deterioration alongside the license condition and potentially ways to prevent the further recalls. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for that comprehensive overview. So now we've had an overview of the roadmap. We're going to introduce you in a short while to an actual case study, so to apply the roadmap. And we'll start at the very beginning and apply the case study throughout the journey to consider how someone, like the case study we're going to show you, Sammy, how she screens into our pathway. And so we're going to start at the beginning, basically. So we're going to look at how does someone like Sammy screen into our pathway? So to start with, practitioners will complete their OASIS risk assessment, which is as you will probably know, is a static and dynamic risk assessment, which assesses the person's level of risk and helps to formulate a risk management plan. So depending on the information in the OASIS assessment, the OASIS summary page will indicate whether the person on probation has screened into the pathway for personality difficulties. Men and women have a different screening tool. For women, we consider a risk screening, so they must be high or very high risk of harm and or MAPA eligible. And women must have 10 or more indicators on their screen score. And this might include a history of the use of weapons. There might be evidence in their history of violence. There might be domestic abuse present as perpetrator. They might have an arson offence, for example. There might be evidence that that person has difficulties coping, poor emotional well-being, or perhaps accommodation issues which are linked to the risk of harm. So there are examples of some of the indicators that we would look for. For men, we consider risk screening. So again, are they high or very high risk, in particular for a violent or a sexual offence, alongside 7 or more indicators on the screen score. And for men, this is generally use of violence, extreme or otherwise, evidence of manipulative or predatory behaviour. Have they shown history of impulsivity, for example? And do they have 1 or more conviction under the age of 18? And is there evidence of any childhood behavioural difficulties, any self-harm, suicidal intent, and any challenging behaviours historically or currently? And again, that's not an exhaustive list, but it gives a flavour of indicators that are linked to personality difficulties, which will pull through on an OASIS assessment. We tend to screen out, so we tend to screen a person out, male or female, if the primary issue is severe mental health, or if, for example, the person's primary need is a learning disability. So there's a lot of information there. So just to recap, the primary PED indicators include presence of childhood difficulties. They might have experienced abuse or exhibited behavioural problems. There might be a history of mental health, some evidence of self-harm or suicide, and the person is presented with any type of challenging behaviour. So you're probably thinking there are a lot of people on probation who fit this profile. True, which is why in Northumbria and Durham and Tees Valley PICS, we apply a prioritisation framework. And this ensures that we are focusing on the most complex cases for our pathway services. So we tend to prioritise women, transitional cases, and by that we are referring to youth offending cases that are coming across into the adult services. Black and minority ethnic cases, IPP and LIFA cases, because we know very well that they tend to be extremely stuck in the system. We consider any cases that screen in that are very high complexity, where there is a pattern of recall. And we also prioritise NSD cases, so cases that fit under the National Security Division function. We are a small resource across the North East, but we do have a significant demand and a waiting list. So therefore, although the OASIS screens the cases in and guides us, we decide as a multidisciplinary team on a case-by-case basis who actually meets the criteria and who is suitable for the PICS and the ERMS service, or whether that person can be signposted to a more relevant provision. So they might be complex and difficult and stuck, but they might not hit our criteria, but still need help with another relevant service. And our team would look to signpost on to the most relevant service. So when we triage cases, we also review the case file and any reports by probation, prison, psychology, and or psychiatrists. So already at this stage, we are building up a picture of the person's biological, psychological, and social factors which influence their behaviour.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, so as Elaine explained, the criteria to meet the pathway is built into the OASIS, and so that gets populated as the practitioner is making their assessment. Once the OASIS is complete, it will hit one of three points. Either it will inform you that there is insufficient detail for a decision to be made as whether the pathway criteria is met. And that will depend on those questions that relate to the male or female. What that will do is act as a prompt for the individual, the practitioner doing the assessment, to go back and relook at those questions where the missing information is, to get an answer whether to be screened in or screened out. If criteria is met, they will be screened in, and the practitioner will then be contacted to see if they are wanting to put a referral into the PICS team. If they are screened out, it'll just let people know that they don't meet the criteria for the pathway. However, that doesn't have to be the end of the matter. There are some individuals that will be screened out that the practitioner may think can benefit from a PICS consultation. They might be a medium risk individual with, I don't know, odd behaviour or just problematic, maybe narcissistic behaviour. They don't often always screen in, so the practitioner can then ask for an override. That will come into the referrals and will be looked at again by the psychologist and myself to see whether involvement with the PICS team would be found useful. We do try to keep them to a minimum because, as Elaine explained, we are a small resource with a very big demand, but they will be considered alongside those that naturally screen in. So, as I've explained, the criteria is built into the OASIS. So the OASIS is very important. We know that for risk management purposes, but the more that can be put into the OASIS, the better the picture that can start to be built up by the clinicians and those involved with the individual. We do our work in a multidisciplinary way, and we need that information from all the disciplines involved with the individual to get a good rounded picture. I'm not here to tell you really what makes a good OASIS is. People will know that, and there are tools to assist with that. But basically, it's to think about everything. Previous convictions are often not thought about, and they are a wealth of information as to patterns that have gone previously and may be connected. You might have somebody with an offence of, say, criminal damage that doesn't mean a lot, but the triggering factors to that, if you look back through previous offending behaviour, can be pertinent in building up that picture. So previous convictions are an important source for us to look at. Previous OASIS as well. No, we don't. If somebody might have been on probation a lot of times and for a long time, and there may be lots and lots of OASIS, and nobody would expect you to read them all with a fine-tooth comb. But information does get lost over time with OASIS, particularly where they're abridged, where you've got too many words, things have to be lost. So sometimes if you're reading something and you think something's missing, it might be worth going back a little way and looking at previous OASIS just to see what's been there before. Substance misuse is another one. Often you will speak with the client and they'll tell you maybe they're in treatment, and you can just put that down that they're in treatment. But if you actually contact the substance misuse agency, they may be registered to be in treatment, but they may not be attending, or their treatment might have finished, or they're only attending to get their script and they're not engaging with service. All these are indicators to the PICS team as to where that individual is at that point in time. Elaine talked about the transitional cases from the Youth Offending Service as one of our priorities. My experience as a probation practitioner is if you contact the YOS team, they have a wealth of information that can feed into an OASIS. The assets are really, really good, particularly with things when children have been subject to child services as a child themselves. They may not want to divulge that information. They may not even know that information, but that information is often there if you can access an asset. The interviews with the person on probation themselves is also important. I know as a practitioner we can get very involved in what professionals think and what agencies think, but the perspective of the person on probation is as important as any other information. As we may see their behaviour as problematic, they may not, and they might be able to rationalise and explain why that behaviour is functional for them, and that needs to be considered as well. Safeguarding checks, well, we all know we need to make safeguarding checks, but they are really important to show patterns in behaviour. Things like domestic violence, people may not ever have a conviction for domestic violence, but the police may have a wealth of information on call-outs where they've attended, and that helps us to build the bigger picture as well. One thing a lot of people forget about is the accommodation providers. If somebody is particularly in local authority accommodation, again, that builds up a pattern of behaviour presented in the community. They'll often have antisocial behaviour officers that can supply information of any problems that they may have experienced with their accommodation. And also, we also consider their diversity. Criminal behaviour and problematic behaviour is functional. We may not see it as that, but it is for the individual, and people's ethnicity, or if they're a traveller, or just their cultural background may explain a difference why their behaviour has been functional for them that we may not consider. And finally, just to say that yes, the PICS team and the ERMS team, they have clinicians there, but also you can reach out to community mental health teams. They may have information where people have engaged or been part of that intervention but not engaged, and again, that's all helpful information to build up the OASIS for the clinicians and for the planning, the risk management planning in relation to the PICS involvement. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. So Elaine mentioned before that we're now going to move on to discuss Sammy, who's a case study to guide you through the pathway a little bit more through the roadmap. So we introduce you to Sammy. She's a female who screened into the offending personality disorder pathway following her OASIS assessment. And from that assessment, Sammy was screened in due to the violent nature of her offending. She was violent towards her partner and was also behaved in an aggressive manner towards the police officers who attended that incident. We know that Sammy's relationship was turbulent, and it's been directly linked to the risk of serious harm in this case. We're also aware that Sammy can find it very difficult to cope with difficult situations, often acting impulsively. Sammy is dependent on alcohol, but in addition to that, she's also admitted to misusing non-prescribed medication. We're also aware that Sammy, until recently, was open to the community mental health team, so we can access information from them too. In relation to her childhood, There are a number of factors that we're aware of, but that Sammy was neglected by both of her parents. She wasn't allowed to show any emotion and wasn't allowed to cry. Due to her parents' behaviour towards her, Sammy felt that she needed to take on the role as caregiver to her younger siblings. Sammy also has a lack of structure and routine. She spends most of her time during the day drinking alcohol with others. She often stays up late, which results in her sleeping in the following day. And this cycle and pattern of behaviour has made her feel really bad about herself. Because of the factors that we've just discussed, Sammy was considered a priority at the point of triage, and she was referred through to the PICS team for a case consultation with a probation practitioner and a psychologist, where they would work through where the difficulties were with this case. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. So in any PICS consultation, health and probation colleagues come together to look to work with the probation practitioner to help to formulate the problems for the person on probation, in this case, Sammy. So within the consultation with Sammy's PP, we considered the following. We asked what Sammy's PP was hoping to get out of the consultation. So the PP should always come, the probation practitioner should always come to a consultation like Sammy's did, well rehearsed in terms of knowing the case and what the factors are within the case. And the psychologist and the PD-PP, so the probation practitioner for the personality disorder team, used the 5 Ps model to gather information to develop the case formulation on Sammy. So what are the 5 Ps? So they looked at what were the predisposing factors for Sammy, what were her actual presenting problems, what were perpetuating the problems for her, what were precipitating the issues, and also what were the protective factors at that time for her as well. And that encompasses the 5P model. And also, what is the PP most concerned about? So what is the PP most concerned about in terms of in relation to Sammy's risk? It's important in a consultation to look at what interventions have been completed so far. So Sammy's PP was asked to say or to talk about what interventions have been undertaken and what the outcome of that has been. And also to explore what Sammy's goals were at that point. So what would she identify as her problematic areas? In any consultation, the PP's feelings are explored as well. So we asked the PP how they felt about working with Sammy. And this offered the PP an opportunity to think about the dynamics of their relationship with her and what the stumbling blocks might be there, or indeed what might be working well. Usually in a consultation, the psychologist and the PD practitioner will start thinking about a plan about 15 minutes towards the end of a consultation. And this allows them to round the 5P model up and think about any recommendation. So in the case of Sammy, possible recommendation and pathway planning options were discussed. At this stage, the PP was asked about Sammy's motivation and what her specific needs were, and also how long she had left on sentence. And this is a really important aspect because we have to have enough time to complete specific types of psychologically informed interventions. So we can't set recommendations that don't work with that person's time frame in terms of how long they have left on their order or license. And at the end of the consultation, Sammy's PP was asked if everything had been covered, if they'd, expressed everything that they wanted to and had the space to do that. And at that point, the practitioners also offered a review. So if they want to come back and review the case at any point, they can. So from the case consultation, Sammy's formulation was developed, and here on the screen is Sammy's formulation. And if we've talked about a formulation quite a lot so far, and what it is, as you will have probably worked out, it's a hypothesis about the cause and nature of her personality difficulties and how to manage these in the most effective way. So we can see how the formulation breaks down into different areas with a focus on a strengths-based approach. So the aim of Sammy's formulation is to improve her psychological well-being, and it considers the dynamics in the working relationship between herself and her practitioner. And the formulation, as I've said, also looks at next steps planning within our pathway. In Sammy's case, one of the recommendations was for her PP to refer her to the service, which is a multidisciplinary service within OPD, and it's underpinned by the biopsychosocial model, and it helps to support the risk management of any case, in this case, Sammy. So as you can see from the jigsaw, the OASIS sections that we've talked about and the indicators, you can see how they pull through and feature in the formulation, and how the 5P model is brought in, and the strengths-based approach is very important as well. And then on the far right, we have our recommendation and next steps.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. So Sammy's PP has decided to take that recommendation and refer Sammy to the service, which is the Intensive Intervention and Risk Management Service. What I just want to say at the beginning of this is that all services around the country are different. So what you might be hearing about the North East service might not apply where you are if you're listening somewhere outside the North East. It may well be the same, but they're not like for like, okay. Services is the part of the pathway that actually have the most contact with somebody. And so this is the first point that Sammy will come into contact with any therapeutic interventions or any of the clinicians. What we aim to do is deliver those interventions over a long period of time and develop a relationship with somebody on probation so that we can work with them to reduce their risk and help them move on. In the North East, we've branded our service as Rebuilding Lives. And there are two teams in the North East, one in the north and one in the south, but they both work in exactly the same way using the biopsychosocial model. We have heard as well about the strict criteria, and because there's strict criteria, and also because it's so effective and bespoke, there's a lot of demand for this service. So we deal with our referrals in a particular way. So Sammy's referral comes into a multidisciplinary team meeting, an MDT meeting, and we have a case discussion. That's considered by the whole team together. So every week we have these referral meetings, and Sammy's referral is brought along and discussed with a mixture of clinicians and probation staff. So that might be occupational therapists, psychotherapists, psychologists, clinical support assistants, PSO, PO, SPO. Everybody makes a decision together using our different perspectives, our different knowledge and our different experience. Alongside that conversation and that mixture of disciplines, we've also got the formulation that was prepared in the psychologically informed consultation. And that's really vital for us. We need to know that formulation and know what Sammy's issues are. What does she need? Are we the right service for her? And has it been recommended as well? Our colleagues from Pixel often come along and they can answer all the questions that we might have about that formulation or anything that isn't in the formulation that we might need to know about Sammy to make our decision. But we don't just consider the formulation, we'll also think about, has Sammy got enough time? As Elaine mentioned before, has Sammy got enough time actually to engage with us? This is a relational service, so we can't build a relationship with somebody that's going to affect long-term change in a short period of time. Does Sammy have any issues that mean that she might not be able to engage with us at the minute? Is there substance misuse? Does that need stabilising first? Things like that. And then we also, most importantly, actually want to know, does Sammy consent? It's absolutely essential that Sammy sees ERMS or Rebuilding Lives as a voluntary thing that she wants to engage in. She has to commit to it, and once she's in, she needs to stay on board, but it has to be voluntary. And the reason for that is if we're asking somebody to engage in a really meaningful relationship, but we're also saying, but you have to, it starts to impact really on the integrity of the service that we're offering. So we really need her to be on board. But you might have guessed, spoiler, that the Rebuilding Lives multidisciplinary team does decide to take on Sammy's case and screen her for ERMS. So we speak to her PP and she agrees she's going to come to that screening appointment. And that's all we're asking her to do at the minute, is take part in the screening. So the initial screening takes place, and that's usually carried out, I would say in the North East actually, pretty much always carried out by two professionals from different disciplines. And there's a few reasons for that. So we'll have a mixed pair. It could be a clinical support assistant and a psychologist. It might be an occupational therapist and a probation officer, but it's always mixed up. It gives us a few things. It allows us to collect all of the information in that screening appointment, because sometimes people talk over here and over here and over here, and you've got to circle back and ask things. It means we don't miss anything. It gives us resilience in the appointment. I think we have to remember sometimes that we're dealing with people with personality difficulties, and sometimes those appointments can be quite hard, and it just means we've got each other for debrief and support. But finally, what it does mean as well is that it covers as much of the biopsychosocial model as possible. We've got the different disciplines in the room who might spot different things and have different reflections. Sometimes it takes us more than one screening appointment as well to get somewhere with somebody. You can imagine sometimes people come along, Sammy might be having a bad day. We've heard about substance misuse, we've heard about a turbulent relationship, maybe she's not quite ready to fully engage in that appointment. We can come back and we take our time to make sure we've got the best information we possibly can. The clinicians will use a tool called the Recovery Justice Star to gather their information. So that's a strengths-based assessment. It's also based on the desistance model. It looks at Sammy's strengths. What can we use? What does Sammy already have? What tools has she already got that we can build on to help her move forward and become unstuck? But of course, we can spot people's needs when we do that as well. So Sammy's case is then brought back to the MDT, the multidisciplinary team, for discussion and allocation. Again, it might seem a little bit backwards and forwards, but we bring that assessment back. The clinicians and probation staff discussed it again, and we make a joint decision about whether or not we're taking somebody's case on. At that point, we'll also decide where to allocate. So the case belongs to everybody. It's an MDT. The case belongs to all of the practitioners, but there'll be a lead person who will pick up with their discipline, depending on where most of Sammy's needs and strengths are. She might need contact with different disciplines throughout her time with the Rebuilding Lives, or she might only ever have contact with one discipline, but everybody owns the case and gives advice. So that process of referral and assessment and decision making can take a little while. It can take a few weeks. And when you're a probation officer and you've got a risk management plan to write and you're worried, you might be thinking, oh my God, why is this taking so long? But it's because we have to gather the best information that we can for Sammy so that we know we're going to have the right relationship with her and that the outcome from ERMS is going to be positive. But as you've probably guessed, the team does decide to accept her onto the Rebuilding Lives caseload. And we start the planning for interventions and thinking about where the focus for work will lie for Sammy.
So within Rebuilding Lives ERMS, we use a structured clinical management framework. And for those of you who don't know, structured clinical management is a generalist treatment for people who have personality and relational difficulties. So this might include problems with managing emotions, moods, triggers of distress, the urge to deal with feelings and thoughts really quickly, and those interpersonal situations that can make them feel really vulnerable or sensitive, such as feeling rejected in relationships or being alone. So our personality refers to the way we think, feel and behave, and due to life experiences and difficulties, we can have problems in these areas, and particularly in how we relate to one another. SEM's been found to be as effective as other treatments for people with personality difficulties, such as DBT and MBT. SEM's found that it can help people address the personality and the relational difficulties, and those effects can be longer lasting than other therapies. So emotion and mood regulation, those managing urges and those interpersonal problems and the quality of life can improve with an SEM approach, and they're usually maintained over time. So the outcomes of using this approach are quite hopeful and good, and positively for the people that we work with, there's really little risk associated with the application of this model. So ideally in practice, SEMs ran in both a group scenario and in one-to-one. So whilst Rebuilding Lives aren't able to offer groups at the moment, we are using this approach within our one-to-one sessions with people. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that SEM is really accessible. It doesn't discriminate for people from diverse backgrounds, ages or gender, so it's really inclusive. So
we're just going to look at how Sammy's journey might progress. So at this point in the roadmap, Sammy would have agreed to work with us, and we would have begun doing our assessment. We would have started developing an intervention plan using the SEM model. However, often with our clients, when we first start working with them, being in the community can be really overwhelming, and they can start to present behaviours that are linked to their risk. On the roadmap, this is represented by a roundabout. So in Sammy's case, she has started to experience difficulties where we're noticing that she is suppressing her emotions, and this is resulting in outbursts. Knowing what we know from our formulation, this is obviously a trigger and a perpetuating factor that is going to escalate a risk and possibly increase the chance of her recall. And she'll keep going round and round and round unless we are able, obviously, to intervene and put something in place to minimise the risk. So using the Slido, what we want you to do is have a think about what you would do with her. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answers because we're all from different disciplines, so what one might do might differ from somebody else. Yeah. So using that code, we would just like you to think of a few words or an intervention, something that you would do.
I know some people don't have access to the Slido function, so feel free just to pop stuff in the chat if you want to. I can see there's still a few people typing, so we've got a few good ideas there in terms of considering art therapy. Go back and revisit the formulation, like the roundabouts in the pathway, joint formulation, including SAMI, and looking at emotional regulation skills. I think there's still a couple more coming through.
Someone's also added in the chat discussing supervision.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one's really important, asking what SAMI wants to allow her to feel heard and provide a safe place. I think that's possibly it. It doesn't look like anybody else is typing any. Oh, there's one more. Pressure's on this one. Yeah, that last one's really important as well, exploring what has triggered the change. So what's going on at that point? Okay, we'll stop sharing that and move on.
Okay, I'm just going to reshare the presentation. I won't be a second. There we are. So as we know, Sammy's journey is progressing, but she's at risk. Her risk is escalating. What can we do to support her? And we've just seen some really lovely ideas there on the Slido that actually you'll see does marry up with what we would do. So what can the multidisciplinary team do to support her? They could have an MDT or a professionals meeting. So as I said before, even though there might be a lead professional on the case, everybody in the MDT sort of owns Sammy's case together. So the professionals might meet together with their different expertise from their different disciplines and come up with some plans about how to support Sammy and her PP. Rebuilding Lives team both teams have regular MDTs anyway, so that's something that we would normally do. But you could have an extraordinary meeting as well if you needed to about Sammy and involve her PP, perhaps staff from the approved premises if she's in one, things like that. These MDTs and professionals meetings as well could also come in the form of a MAPA professionals meeting. It might be a safeguarding meeting. It could be approved premises, something like that. That could also count. Clinicians involved in the case might decide to reformulate Sammy's case. So they'd have a conversation and be thinking about how is Sammy experiencing things at the moment? How is she perceiving situations? What is she going through, and how is that impacting on her behaviour, so that they can come up with a plan of actually a new plan. How might we help Sammy and her PP? As somebody said in the chat, the PP or the clinician could bring the case to supervision, have a conversation, take some advice, make some plans. But they could also do another reformulation done in partnership with the probation officer as well. So the PP could have information that the clinicians don't have. They need to come back together and reformulate. And finally, reflective practice, either in a group or a one-to-one. That's a real opportunity for clinicians or PPs to reflect on Sammy's case, create some fresh perspectives and replan and sort of remaneuver. But what's the most important thing on the left-hand side of the slide there is that all the professionals are communicating and remaining active in the case, and Kate's going to tell us a bit about that now.
So within the team, like we've said before, we've got psychology, we've got OTs, we've got the OPD and probation practitioner, as well as Sammy's regular probation practitioner, and we've got our support staff. So something that we might do is think about the intensity of intervention. Is it too much or is it too little? Do we need to think about the way the work's being structured? Is psychology running nicely alongside OT intervention, or actually is something clashing somewhere that's caused that change with Sammy? So hopefully what you can hear is that throughout all of the interventions of the meeting, that Sammy is very much held in mind. It might be that actually something we're doing is too much for Sammy, and we can kind of pull that back and we can keep that for a later date. And we can think about like the use of activity, the use of different interventions, to kind of enhance that rapport and that therapeutic relationship that we've got with Sammy, because running throughout, that's the most important thread that kind of holds everything together. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
So one of the areas that were highlighted on the previous slide was reflective practice, to support the practitioner to work with Sammy. So in our area, so in the Northeast, reflective practice is really encouraged within approved premises and across the PDUs, and that's to promote colleagues reflecting safely on high-risk, complex cases such as Sammy's, where the PP might be really worried, concerned, even distressed and stressed about the case. And reflective practice is a safe group space to reflect, revitalise and rebuild in relation to the case. So in this case, Sammy clearly screens into the pathway, and her case was brought to the reflective practice session. However, reflective practice is not just for screened in cases. The service can be accessed for non-OPD cases too that are complex and stuck and are causing the PP difficulties as well, and that could be relational difficulties or otherwise. So please talk to your colleagues in your local OPD pathway to find out more about the reflective practice offer in your particular area. We would also encourage SPOs in the teams and within the APs to encourage staff to engage with any reflective practice offer that you have in your area. It's a really, really productive, safe space, and it's facilitated by health staff, usually a psychologist or the probation practitioner within the OPD service. And it's there to discuss challenging cases, and sometimes the sessions are case-led, so Sammy's practitioner used the space to discuss Sammy and the complexities there, but other times the sessions can be themed. So there might be, for example, a reflective session on narcissism and understanding more about that, or perhaps women and substance misuse, for example, or it might be a session purely based on relational matters. So really it's an opportunity, it's a safe space, it's facilitated, and it gives practitioners a chance to think and consider how to work in a more psychologically informed way. Thanks.
So we're coming back to Sammy now just to find out really about what happened to her next. And it's not good news for Sammy, unfortunately. Sammy's risk has escalated and she's reoffended, and that's led to recall. But in the OPD pathway, and especially in Rebuilding Lives, we hope for the best, we plan, we want to support people to get through their licence, but we know that they're going to come across bumps in the road, sometimes numerous bumps and sometimes significant bumps, and people do get recalled. We're dealing with people with complex needs. They often struggle to engage with their licence and they might need several attempts to get through it, like Sammy does. There aren't any quick fixes. We have to work with people over a long period of time and sometimes keep coming back and back and back. And that's one of the really positive things about Rebuilding Lives, is that when there's a rupture, maybe a recall, maybe someone disengages, we stand by them and we stick with them. And that's one of the things that helps them get through the process. So the service is set up to handle those bumps, but what happens now? What do we actually do? Well, we'll have a post-recall meeting, and in North East that's actually coordinated and brought together by our Link Probation Officer, but in attendance are the clinicians from the Psychologically Informed Consultation Service, PICS, the Rebuilding Lives clinicians and the PP, and perhaps approved premises as well if needed. And what this is set up to reflect on the circumstances around the recall. It's absolutely not a quality assurance exercise. So we're not sitting in that meeting asking, did you send a letter? Did you do an OASIS on this day? Did you make that referral? It's an opportunity for everybody who is involved in that case to reflect. You know, how was I feeling when I was supervising this person? Was there anything that went really well? What can we build on next time? What would we do differently next time? How am I feeling now post-recall? And what thoughts have we got on what we're going to do next? So that meeting will be set up really for the benefit of everybody to reflect, because these cases can be really difficult, but also we want it to be an opportunity for the PP to help them inform their recall reviews. It's not normally going to be done in time for that first 14-day review. We know that we need, you know, people need to see the person, that Sammy needs to be spoken to or hopefully seen. But after that, for those Part C and ongoing reviews of recall, this can be very, very helpful. And then what are the next steps in pathway planning for Sammy? Well, recall does not mean that Sammy is discharged from Rebuilding Lives. The most important thing is that in Sammy's case, recall shouldn't be seen as complete and absolute failure. It isn't. It's not ideal, but it isn't a failure. Sammy's now on the pathway. She's on the community pathway. She may move to the custody pathway, but she wants to engage. She knows what's on offer and she's on board. She's done some work and we know she's capable of doing more work. Professionals have a good understanding of Sammy and her needs and have a relationship with her, and there's a plan for work in the future. There's absolutely been progress and she's no longer stuck. Sammy's able to hold on to hope after her recall.
Okay, so before we move on to the end of our presentation and take questions, we would like you to listen to a final poem which was written by Niall. Niall's probation practitioner engaged with PICS who recommended the ERMS team. Niall was referred into ERMS and has been working with our team. We think his words are really powerful and outline the strengths-based aspect of working with people on probation in a biopsychosocial way. So these are Niall's own words. Before I worked with Emma, life was a mess. Drinking, taking Valium and using violence to relieve stress. My life was basically jail. Never used to try in the past, usually would always fail. Other agencies have mainly blamed drugs, mental health and psychosis, but Emma was the one that got me the right diagnosis. Others in the past probably thought was a lost cause and was just a dick, but no one sussed that I was autistic. Repeated same mistakes nearly every time, going to jail and committing the same crime. Emma helped change my way of thinking, not to act on impulse and avoid making the same mistakes, and here to stop me drinking. Still need improvement with emotions, although I've learned to not get into conflict and avoid commotion. So thanks to Emma and her team for helping me try and achieve my biggest dream. That is contact with my boys and to experience family joys. We think that was quite a nice way to end off, and we're now happy to take any questions that anyone might have. feel free to pop them in the chat if you don't want to ask.
Oh, someone's got their hand up there.
Hi.
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 Hi, it's Marge. I'm a user researcher at Digital Justice, and we have been talking a lot about strengths-based assessing and what that might look like with a person on probation. So you mentioned you do this, and I was just curious to know, like, how the collaboration about a plan of any kind takes place. Is it verbal? Is it on paper? Do you get them to fill things in on a computer? Like, what are the best physical props for engaging with this sort of thing?
So I think one of the clinicians that does the assessments is probably best placed to answer that. Anybody want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and if I miss something, Kate and Becky, just help. So on our first contact, we tend to do the recovery justice star assessment, which is basically assessing 10 different areas in their life. At the moment, it's coming on top of mind: accommodation, mental health, relationships, use of alcohol and drugs. During the assessment, we don't focus just on the problem, but how they know how they're managing that. So here we kind of focus on things like what being helpful, following any particular interest, hobbies, if that's been kind of used in the past to manage certain things, what they found, they feel need to address, and how they perceive the help will be delivered, so they can engage to a level that we can continue with the intervention. The Justice Star assessment, it's have like a rating score from 1 to 10. So we tend to complete the scoring alongside with them, and just ask them where do you feel at the present during the assessment they're within the score from 1 to 10. 1, it's they feel stuck, it's a lot of difficulties, and 10, it's basically the area, it's not problematic for them. So we kind of, in a nice way, we share as a clinician, our reflection and what we think might be going wrong, but as well, they have the opportunity to share what actually is going on for them and where exactly is the need, because sometimes we might need certain intervention might be more helpful than what they believe, but we always try to do it in a collaborative way, because sometimes they are not ready for that intervention. They might be too challenging or too complex, so that potentially we're gonna kind of lead to them disengaging from the support because they just found it's too difficult. I don't know if I answered the question, so help, Kate. Could I just ask you to clarify? So when you're asking them 1 to 10, are you filling in something on a computer? Are they writing anything?
The Justice Star, it's a recovery Justice Star is an assessment. At the moment, I don't know anymore. I can't remember anymore. But it's on the top. It's like a blank, like a paper sheet with a star. In each area, like for example, accommodation, there is like a line on the star from 1 till 10. Then I can recollect, then I think it's coming mental health and well-being. I can't remember.
Want me to share it, Ellie?
Yeah. If you have it handy, you can share
Yeah.
it. It is very difficult to describe it, I believe.
Can you see it? Is it there?
Yes, I see the Justice. Okay, fine, great.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious about the things you literally use in a collaboration that they would see or touch or do,
Yeah.
or is it just you asking and them responding?
There's a really helpful workbook that goes alongside the ratings as well, with like diagrams, and shows like the level of stuckness or the level of kind of self-reliance, and that's really supportive when we're filling that in. And moving forward, there's a section of that assessment that looks at goal setting, and if that's too much, I sometimes just ask someone to pick one of the domains that either actually is a little bit tricky, or actually if they're doing it really well, let's talk about like a maintenance goal for that and keep that going, because that's really strengths based. But I think every client's different, and you sometimes find yourself adapting that process just to their learning style, or we might draw something out if that's how they want to understand it. So it does change, doesn't it? We don't have kind of a standardized way of doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat, and it says, it's from Ella. Thanks, Ella. It says, you mentioned about clinical overrides for some cases for OPD. Who is the OPD consultant to contact with regards to discussing these overrides, and how would you make that contact? Well, in our area, again, you would need to check in your within your local pathway, but the PPs request a clinical override through our functional mailbox. And then we take the clinical override to a clinical override meeting, and within that, it's usually one probation. It's either me or the probation practitioner and one of our health colleagues. We do it collaboratively, and we will consider the clinical override in that meeting. So it would be to make direct contact with your OPD PICS team, Ella. As I said in the presentation, we in the Northeast, we have to keep those numbers low in terms of considering clinical overrides because of the tight criteria. So just to give you an example, in an earlier quarter, there were only 5 that we considered, and none of them we agreed to clinically override. But what we did do was offer some further support and signposting to other services. So we don't consider them in high number. They don't come in high numbers, to be fair, and they're not frequent because of the tight criteria, because we are a commission service, so we have to stick to our criteria. Thanks. I hope that answers the question.
We've got another question from Tia, which says, are you aware of any or recommend any research papers around the biopsychosocial model? I'm interested in the theory behind it. I wonder if that's one for clinicians, and if so, if we could drop in the chat afterwards, would that be the best way to answer that, do you think?
I mean, there is a lot of research on the internet, and if you type the biopsychosocial model, there is a lot of articles, and the method was introduced by George Eckel, I believe, in the 1970s or 80s, something like that. So since then, there is a lot of research.
I can put the citation for it in to show how it was started.
Yeah, Becky, that would be lovely as well. There is a lot of, it depends how people learned. We all have different learning styles, but there is a lot of videos on YouTube just explaining it in more kind of acceptable language with pictures. So there is a lot of information.
Lovely, thank you. Then we have a question from Sarah. Do you have any tips on how to explain, introduce or label the BPS model to the people you work with so that it is less clinical?
I would draw it. I would get lots of paper and some pens, and I would draw it out and map. Like if you did a timeline of their life, and you could do lots of lines of which bit's bio, which bits, to make those links. I think it depends on how your service user learns and likes to engage. But yeah, we do tend to do a lot of drawing, especially when it comes to sharing formulations and explaining things. It tends to be lots of paper and nice pens.
Thank you. And then from Deborah, we've got, would the intervention continue post recall, brackets whilst in custody? How would the case be picked back up on re-release? and will the length of time spent back in custody impact on this? I'll answer that one and give the clinicians a break. So yes, the point of firms is that we stay with people when they've been recalled, and that is part of the the implementation guide says that yes, we stay with people post recall and we continue that relationship. But you've picked up on the reality of it in your question, actually, with will the length of time spent back in custody impact on this? And yes, of course it does. So if we know that somebody's gone into custody and that they're going to be back out within 6 months, or something like that, or we've got a bit of work left to do with them and then they're going to be at sentence end, we would consider all of those cases individually and probably stick with them. But when we've got people going back in for what could be a couple of years, what we'll tend to do is close it off in a sensible sort of validating way for them, and then they can be re-referred, so people can come back and back and back. They're not sort of, if we do have to finish things because of the length of time they're going to be in custody, that doesn't mean we wouldn't stay necessarily in contact with them, and it doesn't mean they can't be referred back in. And certainly we've got quite a few people at the minute in custody who we are in touch with, but that's a really good point. Thank you. And it probably varies from service to service as well. I mean, if we say at the minute in the North East, we've got over 11,000 people on probation and only about 70 on ERMS, the places are limited. So sometimes we do have to look at what's needed right now. But as much as possible, we try, if we are going to withdraw, then we try and do that in the most constructive and helpful way possible for the person. Just going to see if there's any more questions. No. Any final questions before we move to close?
No, what I would say is look out for workforce development, so OPD briefings in your local area. So PICs, the PIC side of the team are responsible locally for upskilling the workforce really in terms of working in a psychologically informed way. So in our northeast area, we have a regional offer where we offer a schedule of briefings. So there tends to be one every month on different aspects of working in a psychologically informed way. Anything from introduction to the pathway, to mental health awareness, to understanding formulation, to neurodiversity. And there we offer a specific 2-day course for SPOs as well around OPD. So again, have a chat with your local OPD, SPO and health colleagues and practitioners, and see what they offer in your area if you want to learn more. Thank you. So just to round up, we know from listening to those that we work with that what people with personality difficulties need most is hope. And that's the hope that there are interventions that will help them to live a life worth living. And this is why the biopsychosocial model is so relevant to our work, as it helps us to more effectively understand the person while supporting the management of their risk.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your participation and your patience for some of the minor technical stutters. We hope you've learned something today, hopefully a lot about the biopsychosocial model and how it underpins our work, and enjoy the rest of your day. You've been fab participants. Thank you.